A black boy named Jaden finds a lost dog on his way home and decides to return it to its owner, a wealthy man named Mr. Lawson. The next day, a police officer shows up at his door. What could be the reason behind this unexpected visit? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Jaden Thompson was the kind of teenager any mother would be proud of. At 16 years old, he was responsible, hardworking, and excelled in school. Jaden lived with his mother, Denise Thompson, in a modest neighborhood. It wasn't the fanciest place, but it was home the small. Two-bedroom house was cozy, with its worn-out furniture and the faint smell of the lavender, air freshener that Denise loved so much. The walls were adorned with framed photos, pictures of Jaden as a baby, his first day of school, and a few of his school awards. These reminders of his achievements meant the world to Denise. Life hadn't always been easy for the Thompsons. Jaden's father had left when he was just a toddler, leaving Denise to raise him on her own. She worked long hours as a nurse's aide at the local hospital, doing everything she could to make sure Jaden had what he needed. But money was tight to help out. Jaden started working part-time at the grocery store down the street. It wasn't much, but every little bit helped. And Jaden was determined to do his part. Despite the challenges, Jaden was an exceptional student. He loved school and had dreams of going to college one day. His favorite subjects were math and science. And he often spent his free time solving puzzles or reading about the latest scientific discoveries. His teachers admired his dedication and his classmates respected him, even if they didn't always understand his passion for learning. It was a chilly Friday evening when Jaden's life took an unexpected turn. He had just finished his shift at the grocery store, the dim glow of the streetlights guiding him as he walked home. The sun had set and the streets were mostly empty, with only the occasional car passing by. Jaden liked this time of day. The quiet gave him a chance to think, to unwind after the bustle of work and school. As he walked, Jaden noticed something unusual. Up ahead near the corner of the block, a small golden shape was moving. He squinted, trying to make out what it was. As he got closer, he realized it was a dog. A golden retriever, to be exact. The dog looked well-groomed, its fur shiny and clean. It was wearing a blue collar, but there were no tags attached. The dog seemed lost, wandering aimlessly, occasionally sniffing the ground, as if searching for something familiar. Jaden's heart went out to the dog. He knew what it was like to feel lost, to not know where you belonged. He had felt that way many times growing up without a father. Without hesitating, he approached the dog. Speaking softly to it, "Hey, buddy," Jaden said, crouching down to the dog's level. "Are you lost?" The dog looked up at him, its big brown eyes full of trust. It wagged its tail and trotted over to Jaden, nuzzling its head against his hand. Jaden smiled and petted the dog gently, feeling the warmth of its fur against his skin. "You're a friendly one, aren't you?" Jaden murmured. "But where's your home?" He looked around, hoping to see someone searching for the dog. But the streets were deserted. There was no one in sight, and no houses nearby had any lights on. Jaden knew he couldn't just leave the dog out here alone. It was getting colder, and the dog seemed to have been wandering for a while. As he stood up, Jaden noticed a flyer taped to a nearby lamppost. Curious, he walked over to it, the dog following closely behind. The flyer was slightly weathered, but the bold letters were still readable. Missing dog reward beneath the words was a picture of a golden retriever that looked exactly like the one standing beside Jaden. The dog's name was Max, and the flyer listed an address in a wealthy neighborhood across town, along with a phone number to call. Jaden glanced down at the dog, who was now sitting patiently at his feet. "So your name's Max, he said, smiling. The dog barked softly in response. As if agreeing, Jaden felt a sense of relief. At least he knew where the dog belonged. But getting Max back to his owner wouldn't be easy. The address on the flyer was in a part of town that Jayden rarely visited. It was far from his neighborhood, a place where the houses were large, the lawns perfectly manicured, and the cars expensive. It was a world apart from the modest life he and his mother lived. But Jayden didn't think twice about what he needed to do. He knew returning the dog was the right thing, and he couldn't imagine how worried the owner must be. Jayden pulled out his phone, intending to call the number on the flyer, but then he hesitated. What if the person on the other end didn't believe him? What if they thought he was trying to scam them? People often assume the worst because of where he lived or how he looked. It was something he had faced before, and he didn't want to risk it now. After a moment's thought, Jayden decided to return the dog in person. It felt more honest that way, and he hoped it would clear up any doubts the owner might have. Besides, Max seemed comfortable with him, and Jayden didn't mind taking the long walk across town. With a determined nod, he put his phone back in his pocket and looked down at Max. "Come on, Max," Jayden said, patting his leg to encourage the dog to follow. "Let's get you home." Max barked again, his tail wagging excitedly as he trotted alongside Jayden. The two of them made their way down the street, heading toward the wealthier part of town. The further they walked, the more the scenery changed. The houses grew larger, the lawns greener, and the streets cleaner. The air felt different here, calmer, quieter, with only the sound of Max's paws tapping lightly on the pavement. As they neared the address on the flyer, Jayden's heart began to race. He wasn't sure what to expect when he arrived. Would the owner be grateful? Would they even care that he had gone out of his way to return their dog? He pushed the doubts from his mind, focusing instead on doing the right thing. Jayden Thompson stood on the doorstep of the large, pristine house, shifting nervously from one foot to the other. The house was impressive with its manicured lawn, tall white pillars, and spotless windows. It was clear that the owner, Mr. Richard Lawson, was well off. Jayden took a deep breath, holding the leash of the small, golden retriever he had found the day before. The dog Max wagged his tail excitedly, unaware of the tension in the air. When Mr. Lawson opened the door, his face lit up as soon as he saw the dog Max. "You found him!" he exclaimed, his initial enthusiasm evident. For a brief moment, Jayden felt a sense of relief, thinking that this would be a simple and positive exchange. He had done the right thing by returning the lost dog. But then, Mr. Lawson's expression shifted as his eyes landed on Jayden. The warmth faded from his face, replaced by a cold, distant look. Jayden hesitated, then managed to say, "Yeah, I found him wandering near my neighborhood. I saw the flyer and thought I'd bring him back." Mr. Lawson's smile was tight as he reached for Max's leash. "Thank you," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He didn't bother to ask Jayden's name or offer a proper thank you. Instead, he barely looked at Jayden as he pulled Max inside. The door closed with a quiet but definitive click, leaving Jayden standing alone on the doorstep, feeling both confused and dismissed. Jayden's heart sank as he walked away. He had expected at least a bit of gratitude, maybe even a reward for his honesty. But instead, Mr. Lawson's cold reaction left him with a bitter taste in his mouth. He tried to shake it off, convincing himself that it didn't matter. He had done the right thing, and that was what counted. The next day, Jayden was at home when there was a loud knock on the door. He opened it to find two police officers standing on the porch. His heart began to race his mother. Denise appeared behind him, her face filled with concern. "Can I help you, officers?" Denise asked, her voice steady but laced with worry. The lead officer, a tall man with a stern expression, introduced himself as Officer Harris. "We're here to speak with Jayden Thompson," he said, his gaze shifting from Denise to Jayden. "We received a report from Mr. Richard Lawson. He claims that several valuable items are missing from his home, and he believes they were stolen when his dog was returned yesterday." Jayden's eyes widened in shock. "What, I didn't steal anything? I just brought his dog back." He protested, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and disbelief. Denise's face hardened. My son would never do such a thing. There must be some mistake. Officer Harris remained calm, but firm. Mr. Lawson claims that items were missing from his home, shortly after the dog was returned. We need to ask Jayden a few questions and gather more information. Jayden felt a wave of panic wash over him. He had never been in trouble with the law before, and the idea of being accused of theft was terrifying. He looked to his mother for support, and she quickly stepped in. You can ask him your questions. But I'll be right here, Denise said, her voice strong and protective. The officers questioned Jayden about the previous day, asking him to recount every detail of his encounter with Mr. Lawson. Jayden answered honestly, explaining how he had found Max, seen the flyer, and returned the dog to Mr. Lawson's house. He insisted that he had never even set foot inside the house, let alone stolen anything. But despite his earnest answers, Jayden could see the doubt in Officer Harris's eyes. After the questioning, the officers left, but not before Officer Harris informed them that the investigation would continue. We'll be in touch, he said, leaving Jayden and Denise in a state of shock. As soon as the door closed, Jayden collapsed onto the couch, his head in his hands. Mom, I swear I didn't do anything wrong, he said, his voice cracking with emotion. I believe you, Jayden, Denise replied, wrapping her arms around him. We'll get through this no matter what, but it's going to be tough. And tough it was. The news of the accusations spread quickly through their neighborhood. Some of their neighbors, who had always known Jayden as a polite and hard-working young man, stood by him. They couldn't believe that Jayden would ever do something like this. But others weren't so sure. Suspicion and doubt began to take root, and Jayden could feel the judgment in the stares and whispers that followed him. Wherever he went at school, the situation was even worse. Jayden had always been a good student, but now he found it hard to focus on his studies. His classmates were quick to gossip, and soon rumors started spreading like wildfire. The once friendly faces now seemed distant and cold. Even his closest friends began to pull away. Unsure of what to believe, the weight of the accusation was crushing, and Jayden felt more isolated than ever. The community that had once embraced him now seemed divided. Some neighbors still greeted him with warm smiles, but others avoided eye contact, unsure of what to say. Jayden couldn't help but feel a growing sense of betrayal. He had always tried to do the right thing, to help others and be a good person. But now, because of one man's false accusation, his entire life was being turned upside down. Jayden and Denise knew they had to fight to clear his name. But they also knew it wouldn't be easy. The accusation had already caused so much damage, and it was only the beginning. As they braced themselves for what lay ahead, Jayden couldn't shake the feeling that things would never be the same. Again, the next few days were a blur of uncertainty and fear. Denise tried to contact a lawyer, but the cost was more than they could afford. Meanwhile, Jayden found himself questioning everything. How could someone be so quick to accuse him without any evidence? Why did Mr. Lawson look at him with such suspicion? Simply because of the color of his skin. The injustice of it all made Jayden's blood boil. But he knew that anger alone wouldn't solve anything. He had to stay calm, stay strong, and find a way to prove his innocence. But as the days turned into weeks, the pressure only mounted. The police continued their investigation, interviewing neighbors, checking surveillance footage, and piecing together the timeline. Jayden and Denise cooperated fully, but the uncertainty was unbearable. Every time the phone rang, every time there was a knock at the door, Jayden's heart would race, wondering if this would be the moment when everything came crashing down. Despite the support of some friends and neighbors, Jayden felt increasingly isolated. The accusation had cast a dark shadow over his life, and he struggled to find any sense of normalcy. Even the simple act of going to the grocery store, where he worked part-time, became a source of anxiety. His manager, who had always been friendly, now watched him with a wary eye, as if expecting him to do something wrong. It was a constant reminder that in the eyes of many, he was no longer just Jaden Thompson, the hard-working, responsible teenager. He was Jaden Thompson, the suspected thief. Denise did her best to keep things together, but Jaden could see the strain on her face. She was worried sick about him, and the stress of the situation was taking its toll. They had always been close, relying on each other to get through tough times. But this was different. This was a nightmare that neither of them had ever imagined. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Denise turned to Jaden with a determined look in her eyes. "We're going to get through this, Jaden," she said, her voice firm. "I don't care how long it takes or how hard it is. We're going to clear your name, and we're going to make sure that man pays for what he's done." Jaden nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. He didn't know how they would do it, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let Mr. Lawson's lies destroy his life. He had come too far, worked too hard to let everything fall apart. Now, with his mother by his side, he would fight back no matter what it took. But as the days went on, the reality of their situation became increasingly clear. They were up against a wealthy, influential man who had the resources to make their lives miserable. Jaden couldn't help but feel a growing sense of hopelessness. How could they possibly win against someone like Mr. Lawson? The thought of it was overwhelming. But he refused to give up. He had to believe that the truth would come out, that justice would prevail in the end. Little did he know, the road ahead would be even more challenging than he had imagined. The battle to clear his name was just beginning, and the stakes were higher than ever. Jaden would have to dig deep, find strength he didn't know he had, and rely on the support of those who still believed in him. Because if he didn't, he risked losing everything he had ever worked for: his reputation, his future, and even his freedom. And so, as the accusations continued to swirl and the tension mounted, Jaden prepared himself for the fight of his life. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that he couldn't let Mr. Lawson's lies go unchallenged. He was determined to prove his innocence, no matter what it took. But as the darkness closed in, Jaden couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Jaden sat silently in the back of the police car, his heart pounding as they drove him to the station. The weight of the situation pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe. He had never imagined he'd find himself in a situation like this, accused of a crime he didn't commit, facing a future that felt increasingly uncertain. As they arrived at the station, the officers LED'd Jaden inside, where the harsh, fluorescent lights and sterile walls only heightened his anxiety. He was directed to a small, cold room with a metal table and 2 chairs, and the walls felt like they were closing in on him as he waited, unsure of what would happen next. Meanwhile, Denise was at home, frantically trying to figure out how to help her son. She knew they needed legal representation, but the cost was more than she could bear. Denise had always been a strong woman, doing everything she could to provide for Jaden on her own. But this situation was different. It was overwhelming, and the fear of losing her son to a false accusation was almost too much to handle. Back at the station, Officer Harris entered the room and sat down across from Jaden. His expression was unreadable as he opened a file and began asking questions. "Jaden, we need you to be honest with us," he said, his tone serious. "If there's anything you're not telling us, now is the time to come clean." Jaden looked Officer Harris in the eye, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've already told you everything. I didn't take anything from Mr. Lawson's house. I just returned his dog." Officer Harris didn't seem convinced. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "You were the last person at that house before the items went missing." "We need to know what happened." "I never even went inside," Jaden insisted, his frustration growing. "I handed him the leash at the door, and he closed it right after." "That's it?" The questioning went on for what felt like hours, with Officer Harris trying different tactics to get Jaden to confess to something he didn't do. But Jaden stood his ground, knowing that telling the truth was his only option. He was terrified, but he refused to let fear make him say anything that wasn't true. Finally, Officer Harris seemed to realize that Jayden wasn't going to change his story. He sighed, closed the file, and stood up. "We'll continue our investigation." "But you're free to go for now," he said, his tone still skeptical. "But don't leave town." Jayden nodded, relieved to be leaving, but still filled with dread. As he walked out of the station, he saw his mother waiting for him. Denise rushed to him, pulling him into a tight hug. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice shaking with concern. "I'm fine, Mum," Jayden replied, trying to sound stronger than he felt. "But they're not letting this go." Denise nodded, her face etched with worry. "We'll figure this out, Jayden. We'll find a way." But as they left the station, both Jayden and Denise knew that the road ahead was going to be anything but easy the next day at school. Jayden could feel the eyes on him. As soon as he walked through the doors, the usual buzz of conversation in the hallways seemed to quiet. As he passed by, replaced by cold stares and whispered remarks, he could tell that the news of his arrest had spread, and it didn't take long for the rumors to follow. "He's the one who stole from that rich guy," someone muttered as Jayden walked by. "Can you believe it? He always seemed like such a good kid." Another voice chimed in. Jayden kept his head down, trying to block out the voices. But the whispers were like knives, cutting deeper with every step he took. Even his closest friends had started to distance themselves, unsure of what to believe. The betrayal stung more than anything, leaving Jayden feeling isolated and alone. In the cafeteria, Jayden usually sat with his friends. But today, the table was empty. He scanned the room, spotting them at another table, laughing and talking as if he didn't exist. He thought about joining them, but decided against it. The looks they gave him the last time were enough to tell him he wasn't welcome anymore. Jayden grabbed a tray of food and found a seat at the back of the cafeteria. Far from the crowd, he picked at his meal, his appetite gone, and tried to push the thoughts of his lost friendships out of his mind. But it was impossible to ignore the fact that his life had changed. In the blink of an eye, the accusations had turned him into an outcast, and he didn't know how to fix it. The situation was just as bad at the grocery store where he worked. His manager, Mr. Phillips, had always treated him with respect, often praising him for his hard work and reliability. But since the accusation, things had changed. Jayden noticed the way Mr. Phillips watched him, from the corner of his eye, as if expecting him to make a mistake or do something wrong. The once friendly conversations were now reduced to short, curt exchanges, and Jayden couldn't help but feel like a stranger in a place that had once felt like a second home. One afternoon, as Jayden was stocking shelves, he overheard a customer talking to Mr. Phillips. "Isn't that the kid who got arrested?" the customer asked, nodding in Jayden's direction. Mr. Phillips glanced at Jayden, before quickly turning back to the customer. "It's all just a misunderstanding," he said. But there was an edge to his voice that made Jayden's stomach churn. The customer shook his head still. "You might want to keep an eye on him. You never know," Jayden pretended not to hear. But the words hit him like a punch to the gut. He finished his shift in silence, trying to hide the hurt that was gnawing at him from the inside. After school, Jayden went straight to his room and sat on his bed. Staring at the ceiling, the walls felt like they were closing in on him, and the weight of everything that had happened was becoming too much to bear. He needed to do something, anything to clear his name and get his life back. But how the police weren't listening. His friends had abandoned him, and even his own community was beginning to doubt him. That's when he decided he couldn't just sit around and wait for things to get worse. If the police weren't going to find the truth, then he had to prove his innocence, not just for himself, but for his mother, who had worked so hard to give him a good life. He couldn't let her down. He couldn't let Mr. Lawson's lies ruin everything. Jayden picked up his phone and called his best friend Carlos. Carlos was one of the few people who still believed in him, and Jayden knew he could count on him for help. "Hey man, I need your help," Jayden said. When Carlos answered, "Of course, Jaden. What's up?" Carlos replied, his voice full of concern. "I need to find out who really stole from Mr. Lawson." Jaden said, his voice determined. "I need to prove that I didn't do it." Carlos didn't hesitate. "I'm with you." "What do we do first?" Jaden felt a surge of relief. He wasn't alone in this. "We need to retrace my steps from the day I found Max." He said, "Maybe there's something we missed." Someone who saw something. "We need to talk to people. Ask questions, anything that might help." Carlos agreed. And the two of them made a plan to start their search the next day. Jaden knew it was a long shot, but it was the only chance he had. He couldn't just sit back and let his life fall apart. He had to fight for the truth, no matter how hard it was. The next day, Jaden and Carlos set out on their mission. They started by visiting the spot where Jaden had found Max, hoping that someone might have seen him with the doc. They went door to door, asking if anyone had noticed anything unusual that day. Most people hadn't seen anything, but a few had noticed Jaden walking with the dog. Unfortunately, none of them had any information that could help prove his innocence. Despite the lack of leads, Jaden refused to give up. He and Carlos continued to search the neighborhood, talking to anyone who might have been around that day. They even checked the local shops and cafes, asking if anyone remembered seeing Jaden with Max. But again, they came up empty-handed. As the day wore on, Jaden felt his hope beginning to fade. It seemed like no matter what he did, the evidence he needed to clear his name just wasn't there. But then, just as they were about to call it a day, Carlos had an idea. "Wait a minute," Carlos said, stopping in his tracks. "What about the surveillance cameras?" Jaden looked at him confused. Nah. "What do you mean some of the houses around here have security cameras?" "Right," Carlos explained. "Maybe one of them caught something on tape that could help us." Jaden's eyes widened. It was a long shot, but it was worth a try. "Let's check it out," he said, feeling a renewed sense of determination. They went back to the neighborhood and started looking for houses with visible security cameras. It didn't take long to find a few. Jaden and Carlos approached the homeowners, explaining the situation and asking if they could review the footage from the day. Jaden found Max. Most of the homeowners were sympathetic and agreed to help. But after reviewing the footage, they found nothing of interest. Just when it seemed like they were out of options, they found one last house. With a camera pointed toward the street where Jaden had found Max, the homeowner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Jensen, was hesitant at first, but eventually agreed to let them review the footage. Jaden and Carlos watched the footage carefully, their hearts pounding with anticipation. At first, it seemed like another dead end with nothing unusual happening. But then, just as they were about to give up, they saw something. There on the screen was Jaden walking down the street with Max. But that wasn't all in the background. They could see a car parked a few houses down. It was Mr. Lawson's car, and inside, someone was sitting in the driver's seat watching Jaden. Jaden's heart raced as he realized what this meant. Mr. Lawson had been there the whole time. He had been watching Jaden from his car, waiting to see what he would do. It was proof that Jaden wasn't lying, that he hadn't stolen anything. But it also raised more questions. Why had Mr. Lawson been there? What was he really up to armed with this new evidence? Jaden and Carlos knew. They were one step closer to proving Jaden's innocence. But they also knew that this was only the beginning. There were still many unanswered questions, and the fight to clear Jaden's name was far from over. As they left Mrs. Jensen's house, Jaden felt a renewed sense of hope. He wasn't out of the woods yet, but he was determined to see this through to the end. He would prove his innocence no matter what it took. Jaden felt a deep weariness settle into his bones as he returned home from yet another exhausting day of trying to clear his name. The past week had been an unrelenting storm of accusations, disappointment and stress. Even Carlos, his best friend who had stuck by him, couldn't shake the frustration they both felt, Despite all their efforts, the path to proving Jayden's innocence remained steep and treacherous. His heart sank as he walked into his house, knowing his mother Denise would be there doing her best to stay strong for both of them. But he knew it was wearing on her too. Denise looked up from the kitchen table, where she was surrounded by papers. Bills, letters, and documents lay scattered. The physical representation of the chaos their lives had become. The lines on her face seemed deeper than before, etched by worry and sleepless nights. Jayden hated seeing her like this, knowing that all of this turmoil was because he had done what he thought was the right thing. "Any luck today?" Denise asked, though her voice carried little hope. Jayden shook his head, dropping his backpack on the floor. "Nothing solid. We found some footage that shows Mr. Lawson's car was there when I found Max, but it's not enough to clear me." The police don't seem interested in looking deeper. Denise sighed heavily, rubbing her temples. "We need help, Jayden. Someone who knows how to deal with this. But lawyers cost money we don't have." As if on cue, there was a knock on the door. Jayden's brow furrowed as he looked at his mother. They weren't expecting anyone. And after everything that had happened, unexpected visitors weren't a welcome sight. Denise hesitated, then walked to the door, peering through the peephole before opening it cautiously. Standing on the porch was Mrs. Evelyn Brown, their elderly neighbour from 2 houses down. She was a small woman, her back slightly hunched with age, but her eyes were sharp and clear. She held a basket of freshly baked cookies, which she offered with a warm smile. "Hello, Denise, Jayden?" She greeted them warmly, though there was a hint of concern in her voice. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." Denise forced to smile, grateful for the neighbourly gesture. "Of course not, Mrs. Brown. Please come in." Mrs. Brown stepped inside, placing the basket on the table. She took a seat, her gaze shifting between Jayden and Denise, her expression softening with empathy. "I've been hearing about what's been happening, Jayden. I know you're a good boy, and I don't believe for a second that you did anything wrong. That's why I'm here." Jayden exchanged a glance with his mother, who looked equally puzzled. "Thank you, Mrs. Brown," he said quietly. "But I don't know what else we can do. The police won't listen to us, and we can't afford a lawyer." Mrs. Brown nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That's why I wanted to talk to you. You see, before I retired, I was a lawyer. I practiced law for over 30 years. And I've seen cases like this before. People being accused of things they didn't do, because someone with more power thought they could get away with it." Jayden's eyes widened in surprise. He had always known Mrs. Brown as the kindly neighbour, who baked cookies and tended to her garden. He had no idea she had such a background. "I've been out of the game for a while," Mrs. Brown continued, "but I still know how to dig into things. And I still have a few contacts who might be able to help." "I believe you, Jayden. I want to help you clear your name." Denise's eyes filled with tears as she grasped Mrs. Brown's hand. "Thank you, Evelyn. You have no idea how much this means to us." Mrs. Brown squeezed Denise's hand gently. "We'll get through this together. But first, we need to gather information. I've already started looking into Mr. Lawson, and what I found so far is troubling." Jayden leaned forward, his heart pounding with anticipation. "What did you find?" Mrs. Brown pulled a folder from her purse, placing it on the table. "Mr. Lawson isn't the upstanding citizen he pretends to be. He has a history of filing false insurance claims for stolen items. I found records of at least 3 other cases where he accused someone of theft, only for the charges to be dropped when discrepancies were found in his claims. It seems he's been using these claims to collect insurance payouts." Denise's mouth fell open in shock. "And he's trying to do the same thing to Jayden." "It looks that way," Mrs. Brown replied grimly. "But we need more evidence to prove it. If we can show the police that Mr. Lawson has a pattern of behaviour, they'll have to take a closer look at his accusations." Jayden felt a spark of hope ignite within him. This was the break they had been waiting for. With Mrs. Brown's help, they might finally be able to expose Mr. Lawson's lies and clear his name. "What do we do next?" Jaden asked, determination in his voice. Mrs. Brown smiled, pleased to see Jaden's resolve. First, we gather more evidence. I'll need you and Carlos to help me with that. We'll dig deeper into Mr. Lawson's past and see what else we can find. If we can build a strong enough case. We'll take it to the police and demand they reopen the investigation. Jaden nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. He was no longer fighting this battle alone. With Mrs. Brown's expertise and his own determination, he knew they could take on Mr. Lawson and win. Over the next few days, Jaden, Carlos, and Mrs. Brown worked tirelessly. Piecing together the puzzle of Mr. Lawson's past, Mrs. Brown pulled records, contacted old colleagues, and even spoke with people who had been involved in Mr. Lawson's previous cases. What they uncovered was a pattern of deceit that stretched back years. Mr. Lawson had a habit of accusing people of theft, filing insurance claims, and then dropping the charges once he received his payout. It was a scheme that had made him a lot of money, but it was also a house of cards that was about to come crashing down. One evening, as they sat in Mrs. Brown's cozy living room, poring over the evidence, Carlos suddenly looked up, excitement in his eyes, guys. I think I found something, he said, pointing to a document on the screen of his laptop. Mrs. Brown leaned in, adjusting her glasses. What is it, Carlos? It's an old police report. Carlos explained from about 5 years ago. Mr. Lawson accused a young man of stealing a watch from his home. The charges were dropped. When the police found out that the watch had been pawned by Mr. Lawson himself, but he still managed to collect the insurance money. Before the truth came out, Jaden's heart raced as he realized the significance of what Carlos had found. This is it, he said, his voice trembling with excitement. This proves he's done this before. The police can't ignore this. Mrs. Brown nodded, a determined look in her eyes. We have enough to confront Mr. Lawson and take this to the police. But we need to do it carefully. He's a powerful man, and he's not going to go down without a fight. The next day, Mrs. Brown arranged a meeting with Officer Harris at the local police station. She brought with her all the evidence they had gathered, police reports, insurance records, and statements from people who had been wrongfully accused by Mr. Lawson in the past. Jaden and Denise were there as well, their nerves on edge as they prepared to face the man who had turned their lives upside down. Officer Harris listened attentively as Mrs. Brown laid out the case against Mr. Lawson. At first he seemed skeptical, but as the evidence mounted, his expression grew more serious. By the time Mrs. Brown finished her presentation, there was no doubt that Mr. Lawson had been running a fraudulent scheme. For years, this is damning evidence, Officer Harris finally said, his tone grave. I'll have to reopen the investigation and bring Mr. Lawson in for questioning. We'll also need to review his insurance claims and see if there's a pattern of fraud. Jaden felt a weight lift off his shoulders as he heard those words. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to believe that justice might actually be served. When Mr. Lawson was brought in for questioning, he tried to dismiss the accusations, claiming that Mrs. Brown was just a retired lawyer with a grudge and that Jaden was trying to cover up his own guilt. But the evidence was too strong to ignore. Faced with the facts, Mr. Lawson's lies began to unravel. He grew increasingly defensive, and when confronted with the records of his previous false claims, he had no choice but to admit that he had fabricated the story about the stolen items. The confrontation was tense, but in the end, the truth won out. Officer Harris ordered a full investigation into Mr. Lawson's activities, and the charges against Jaden were officially dropped. Mr. Lawson, on the other hand, found himself facing charges of insurance fraud and filing false police reports as they left the police station. Jaden felt a mixture of relief and disbelief. The nightmare that had consumed his life for weeks was finally over. He looked at Mrs. Brown with gratitude, knowing that without her, he might never have cleared his name. Thank you, Mrs. Brown, Jaden said, his voice filled with emotion. I don't know how I can ever repay you, Mrs. Brown smiled warmly, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. You don't owe me anything, Jaden. I did what any decent person would do. You're a good boy, and you deserve to live your life without this cloud hanging over you. Denise, who had been quietly holding back tears, stepped forward and hugged Mrs. Brown tightly. You've given us our lives back, Evelyn. We're so grateful. Mrs. Brown patted Denise on the back, her eyes softening. You're both strong, and you handled this with more grace than most. People could now, let's make sure this never happens again. As they walked home, the tension that had plagued Jaden for so long seemed to dissipate. Carlos, who had been waiting outside the station, ran up to him grinning from ear to ear. Dude, I knew you'd clear your name. Mrs. Brown is a legend, Jaden laughed, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. Yes, she is. I couldn't have done it without her or you, Carlos. Thanks for sticking by me. Carlos shrugged, his grin widening. That's what friends are for, with the ordeal behind him. Jaden knew it would take time to rebuild his reputation, but he was ready to face whatever came next. He had learned the hard way that life could be unfair, but he had also discovered the power of truth, determination, and unexpected allies. As they reached their neighborhood, Mrs. Brown paused, looking at Jaden with a twinkle in her eye. Remember, Jaden, no matter what people say, always hold your head high. You're stronger than you know. Jaden nodded, her words resonating deeply. I will, Mrs. Brown, I promise. With the case against him dropped, the community began to see Jaden in a new light. While some had doubted him, others were quick to apologize for their mistrust. The rumors that had spread at school slowly died down, and even his manager at the grocery store seemed to soften, offering Jaden an apology and extra shifts to make up for the time he had lost. As for Mr. Lawson, his fall from grace was swift and public. The investigation revealed the full extent of his fraudulent activities, and he was forced to face the consequences of his actions. His businesses suffered, his reputation was tarnished, and he was left to confront the reality that his greed had finally caught up with him. In the end, Jaden's struggle proved that even in the face of overwhelming odds, justice could prevail with courage, integrity, and a little help from those who believe in doing what's right. Jaden Thompson sat at the kitchen table, staring at the newspaper spread out before him. The headline read, Businessman Richard Lawson faces charges for fraudulent claims. Beneath it was a detailed account of Mr. Lawson's history, of filing false insurance claims. The article also included the news that all charges against Jaden had been dropped. Denise Thompson. Jaden's mother stood next to him, her eyes brimming with tears of relief. She placed a comforting hand on Jaden's shoulder. It's over, Jaden. You don't have to worry anymore. Jaden glanced up at his mother. A mix of relief and lingering bitterness etched on his face. It feels good that it's finally over, but it's hard to forget everything that happened. Denise nodded, understanding his mixed emotions. I know, honey. It's not easy to let go of the hurt. But we can move forward now. The important thing is that you've proven your innocence. As Jaden and Denise continued to read the newspaper, they saw messages of apology from some of their neighbours. Many had come forward to express their regret for doubting Jaden. Some offered their support, acknowledging how wrong they had been, while this brought a small sense of vindication. It did little to erase the pain Jaden felt from the ordeal. At school, things began to shift. Jaden noticed that students who had avoided him now approached with genuine apologies. It was clear that the truth had reached every corner of the community, and people were beginning to see Jaden for who he truly was, a responsible young man who had been wronged. Despite these gestures, Jaden remained cautious. The experience had taught him that trust was fragile. He no longer wore his usual easy smile, and he approached interactions with a newfound weariness. But rather than letting it embitter him, Jaden decided to use his experience to help others who might find themselves in similar situations. Jaden's determination to stand up for himself and others became evident. as he began speaking at community meetings and school events. He shared his story, advocating for fairness and understanding. He spoke about the importance of not jumping to conclusions and the need for empathy in difficult situations. During one of these events, he met Mrs. Evelyn Brown again. She had become a mentor to him, guiding him through this challenging time and helping him channel his experience into positive action. Mrs. Brown, with her legal background and deep wisdom, offered Jaden not just support, but also a path forward. "You've turned something incredibly painful into a platform for change," Mrs. Brown said during one of their meetings. "Your voice can help prevent others from facing what you went through." Jaden took her advice to heart. He began volunteering with local organisations that supported victims of wrongful accusations. He found purpose in helping others, and each step he took brought him a sense of accomplishment and healing. In recognition of his resilience and integrity, Jaden received a scholarship from a local organisation that honoured young individuals who had overcome significant obstacles. The scholarship was a testament to his character and the strength he had shown throughout the ordeal. The award ceremony was held at a community centre, filled with local leaders and supporters. As Jaden walked to the stage to accept the scholarship, he saw familiar faces: his mother, Mrs. Brown Carlos, and others who had stood by him. The support from these people made Jaden feel that, despite the difficulties, he had built a network of allies and friends who truly valued him. Mrs. Brown stood beside Jaden as he accepted the scholarship. "This is just the beginning, Jaden," she said. "You have a bright future ahead of you, and I'm proud to be a part of it." Jaden smiled, feeling a sense of hope for the first time in a long while. He was excited about the future, knowing that with the support of those around him and his own inner strength, he could overcome whatever challenges lay ahead. As Jaden's life slowly returned to normal, he continued to work hard at school and contribute to his community. His experience had changed him, but he remained committed to his goals. With Mrs. Brown's guidance, he focused on his studies, his volunteer work, and his aspirations for a better future. The incident with Mr. Lawson had left its mark, but Jaden emerged from it stronger and more determined. He had learned the hard lessons of trust, justice, and resilience, and with each step forward, he proved to himself and others that even in the face of adversity, one could find redemption and hope. Jaden's story became a symbol of perseverance and integrity, reminding everyone that even when the world seems unjust, standing up for oneself and others can lead to a brighter, more hopeful future. Jaden Thompson stood in the middle of his new dorm room, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. The room, though modest, was his new home he had moved in just a few days ago, and the walls were still bare, waiting for the personal touches that would make it feel like his own. Jaden's thoughts wandered back to the journey that had brought him here, a journey marked by both triumphs and challenges. Graduating from high school had been a significant milestone, one that had felt even more meaningful after the events of the past year. The graduation ceremony had been a celebration of not just academic achievement, but also of resilience. Friends and family had gathered to mark the occasion, and Jaden had felt a profound sense of gratitude for their support. His mother, Denise Thompson, had been his pillar of strength throughout everything. The day of the ceremony, her eyes had shone with pride and tears as she looked at her son. "You've worked so hard for this moment," she had said, her voice choked with emotion. "I knew you could do it." Jaden had hugged her tightly, feeling a mix of pride and relief. The challenges they had faced together had only strengthened their bond. As Denise left the dorm that day, Jaden had felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness about the future. The scholarship he had received was a testament to his hard work and determination. It was more than just financial aid. It was an opportunity to pursue his dreams. Jaden had decided to study criminal justice, driven by his desire to understand the legal system and make a difference in the world. The road ahead was challenging, but it was one he was eager to navigate. Adjusting to university life had been a whirlwind of new experiences. Jayden's dorm room, though small, had become his sanctuary. He had decorated it with a few personal items: a poster of his favorite sports team, photos of his family and friends, and a small plant that he hoped would thrive. Despite his busy schedule on his first day at the university, Jayden had been introduced to his roommate, Alex Martinez. Alex was an outgoing student with a passion for environmental science, despite their different fields of study. Jayden and Alex quickly found common ground. Their conversations ranged from academic interests to personal dreams, and Jayden felt a sense of camaraderie with his new roommate. Alex's easygoing nature had been a welcome contrast to the stress of starting university. He had a knack for making Jayden feel at ease, whether it was through casual conversations or sharing stories about their lives. Their friendship provided Jayden with a sense of belonging. In his new environment, the transition to university life had also involved acclimating to a more rigorous academic schedule. Jayden had found his courses both challenging and stimulating. His classes in criminal justice delved into complex legal theories and case studies, pushing him to think critically and engage deeply with the material. He had embraced the opportunity to learn and grow, finding satisfaction in tackling difficult subjects and participating in discussions about legal and ethical issues. Jayden had also taken advantage of the university's support services. He attended workshops on managing academic stress and connecting with others, which helped him navigate the emotional aspects of his transition. The counselor he spoke with provided valuable insights and coping strategies, helping Jayden manage the anxiety and pressure that came with starting a new chapter in his life. As the weeks passed, Jayden settled into a routine. His days were filled with lectures, study sessions, and extracurricular activities. He had joined the university's debate team, which allowed him to hone his public speaking skills and engage in discussions on legal and social issues. The debate team became a platform for Jayden to express his views and explore different perspectives, further fueling his passion for criminal justice. Alex, his roommate, continued to be a source of support and friendship. The two spent countless hours discussing their goals and aspirations. Alex's enthusiasm for environmental science and his commitment to making a difference inspired Jayden. Their conversations often revolved around their shared desire to create positive change, albeit in different ways one day. As they sat in their dorm room discussing their future plans, Alex turned to Jayden with a thoughtful expression. "You know, Jayden, your story is really inspiring. It's amazing how you've turned such a tough situation into something positive." Jayden smiled, feeling a sense of validation. "Thanks, Alex. It hasn't been easy, but I'm determined to make the most of this opportunity." Their discussions often led to brainstorming sessions about ways to contribute to their respective fields. Jayden's aspirations in criminal justice were fueled by his desire to advocate for those who were wrongly accused or underserved by the legal system. Alex's focus on environmental science stemmed from a deep concern for the planet and a commitment to sustainability. The bond between Jayden and Alex grew stronger with each passing day. Their friendship provided a sense of stability and encouragement, helping Jayden navigate the complexities of university life with greater confidence. Several months into the academic year, Jayden attended a lecture given by Mrs. Evelyn Brown, the retired lawyer who had played a crucial role in clearing his name. Seeing Mrs. Brown again was a poignant reminder of the journey he had taken. Her presence at the university was a testament to her ongoing commitment to justice and advocacy. Mrs. Brown's lecture was both inspiring and educational. She spoke about her experiences in legal advocacy, sharing insights into the challenges and rewards of fighting for what is right. Her stories were filled with wisdom and compassion, reflecting the qualities that had made her such an influential mentor in Jayden's life. After the lecture, Jayden approached Mrs. Brown with a mixture of admiration and gratitude, Thank you for everything you've done for me. Mrs. Brown, your support has been invaluable. Mrs. Brown smiled warmly, Jaden. It's been a privilege to see you grow and succeed. Remember that the path to justice is not always easy, but it's worth fighting for. Keep using your voice to make a difference. Jaden nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Mrs. Brown's words reinforced his commitment to his studies and his future career in law. Her continued involvement in his journey was a reminder of the impact that one person's support could have on another's life. As Jaden Thompson walked through the university's sprawling campus, he took in the sights and sounds of student life, the vibrant energy of the campus, filled with students discussing their coursework, attending club meetings and enjoying their free time, contrasted sharply with the turmoil of the past year. The sense of normalcy and progress was both reassuring and invigorating. Jaden's time at university had not only provided him with academic challenges, but also opportunities for personal growth. His classes were rigorous, delving deep into topics like criminal law, ethics, and social justice. He found himself increasingly fascinated by the complexities of the legal system and the ways in which it intersected with broader societal issues. This fascination was not just academic. It was deeply personal. Jaden's experiences had given him a unique perspective on the importance of justice and fairness. One evening, after a particularly challenging week of exams and assignments, Jaden sat in his dorm room reflecting on his journey. His thoughts turned to the events that had led him to this point. The wrongful accusation, the support of Mrs. Evelyn Brown, and the eventual clearing of his name. The ordeal had been painful, but it had also been a catalyst for change in his life. He recalled Mrs. Brown's encouragement and her belief in his potential. Her mentorship had been a guiding light during his darkest moments. Jaden knew that her influence extended beyond the immediate resolution of the false accusations. It had inspired him to pursue a career in criminal justice with a renewed sense of purpose. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Alex, his roommate. "Hey, Jaden, are you free to meet up? I've got something to show you." Curious, Jaden agreed to meet Alex at the campus coffee shop. As he made his way there, he reflected on the friendship he had developed with Alex. Their conversations had been a source of comfort and insight, and Alex's enthusiasm for environmental science had sparked Jaden's interest in exploring how different fields intersected with social justice. At the coffee shop, Alex greeted Jaden with a broad smile. "You're going to want to see this?" Alex said, handing Jaden a flyer. Jaden looked at the flyer, which advertised an upcoming conference on social justice and environmental issues. "This looks interesting," he said, intrigued. "What's the connection?" Alex explained that the conference aimed to explore the intersections between various fields and how they could work together to address societal challenges. "I think it would be great for us to attend. It could give us new perspectives and ideas for our future careers." Jaden agreed enthusiastically. "Let's go. It's an opportunity to learn and connect with others who share our passions." The conference was held at a nearby convention center and brought together professionals, academics, and activists from diverse fields. The sessions were informative, covering topics ranging from policy reforms to grassroots activism. Jaden and Alex attended various workshops and panel discussions, gaining valuable insights into how interdisciplinary approaches could address complex issues. During a breakout session on criminal justice reform, Jaden met a panelist named Dr. Alicia Carter, a renowned expert in criminal justice policy. Dr. Carter's work focused on systemic reforms and the promotion of fair treatment within the legal system. Her research aligned closely with Jaden's interests, and he was eager to learn more from her. After the session, Jaden approached Dr. Carter to introduce himself. "Dr. Carter, I'm Jaden Thompson. Your presentation was incredibly insightful. I'm a criminal justice major, and I'm very interested in the work you're doing." Dr. Carter smiled, clearly pleased by his interest. "Thank you, Jaden. It's always encouraging to see young people passionate about reform. What specifically interests you about criminal justice? Jaden shared his personal story, including the challenges he had faced, and his desire to advocate for those who were wrongly accused or underserved by the system. Dr. Carter listened attentively, nodding and understanding. Your experiences have given you a unique perspective. Keep pursuing this path. And don't hesitate to get involved in advocacy and policy work. Jaden left the conference feeling inspired and motivated. The connections he had made and the knowledge he had gained reinforced his commitment to making a meaningful impact in the field of criminal justice. He was determined to use his education and experiences to contribute to positive change. As Jaden progressed through his academic career, he remained committed to staying connected with his community. He frequently visited home and maintained strong relationships with his family and friends. Denise Thompson continued to be a source of support and encouragement, and Jaden's visits were a reminder of the importance of family and community. During one of his visits, Jaden learned about a community outreach program that aimed to provide legal assistance and support to underserved populations. The program was in need of volunteers, and Jaden saw in a way opportunity to contribute directly to the community that had supported him throughout his journey. He reached out to the program coordinator and offered his assistance. Jaden volunteered his time to help with legal clinics, providing information and support to individuals facing legal challenges. His involvement allowed him to apply his knowledge in a practical setting and make a tangible difference in people's lives, working with the outreach program. Also gave Jaden a deeper appreciation for the challenges faced by those who lacked access to legal resources. It reinforced his commitment to advocating for fair and equitable treatment within the legal system. The experiences he gained through this volunteer work further shaped his understanding of the complexities of justice and reinforced his dedication to making a positive impact. As Jaden neared the end of his undergraduate studies, he was presented with a significant opportunity. The university's Criminal Justice Department announced a prestigious internship with a prominent law firm specializing in civil rights and criminal defense. The internship was highly competitive, and Jaden knew it would be a valuable experience. In his pursuit of a career in criminal justice, he applied for the internship, submitting a detailed application that highlighted his academic achievements, volunteer work, and passion for justice. The selection process included interviews and evaluations of his work. After weeks of anticipation, Jaden received the news he had been hoping for. He had been selected for the internship. The internship was a transformative experience for Jaden, working closely with experienced attorneys. He gained hands-on experience in legal research, case analysis, and client advocacy. The work was demanding but rewarding, and Jaden thrived in the challenging environment. The opportunity allowed him to apply his academic knowledge in real-world scenarios and develop valuable skills for his future career. One of the cases Jaden worked on involved a wrongful conviction that had garnered significant media attention. The case was complex, and the team faced numerous obstacles in their pursuit of justice. Jaden's contributions were instrumental in gathering evidence and building a compelling argument for the client's innocence. When the case was ultimately resolved in favor of the client, Jaden felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The victory was a testament to the importance of perseverance and dedication in the pursuit of justice. It also reinforced Jaden's commitment to his career path and his desire to continue advocating for those who were wronged by the system. As graduation approached, Jaden reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point, the challenges he had faced, and the support he had received from mentors. Friends and family had shaped him into the person he had become. He was proud of the progress he had made and excited about the future. Jaden's graduation ceremony was a celebration of his achievements and the culmination of years of hard work. His mother, Denise, attended the ceremony with pride, and Jayden's friends and mentors joined in the celebration. The event was a joyous occasion, marking the beginning of a new chapter in Jayden's life. As he received his diploma, Jayden looked out at the audience, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and fulfillment. The journey had been challenging, but it had also been incredibly rewarding. Jayden knew that the experiences and lessons he had gained would guide him as he embarked on his professional career. With graduation behind him, Jayden prepared for the next steps in his career. He accepted a position with a legal advocacy organisation dedicated to criminal justice reform. The role aligned closely with his passions and allowed him to continue working on issues that mattered to him. As he began this new chapter, Jayden remained committed to making a difference in the world. His experiences had taught him the importance of resilience, empathy, and advocacy. He approached his work with a sense of purpose and a determination to create positive change. Jayden's journey had come full circle, from facing adversity and overcoming challenges to pursuing his dreams and making a meaningful impact. The road ahead was filled with possibilities, and Jayden was ready to embrace them with confidence and hope. His story was one of perseverance and triumph, a testament to the power of determination and the support of those who believe in us. As Jayden looked toward the future, he knew that the challenges he had faced had only made him stronger and more resolute in his commitment to justice and fairness. With a renewed sense of purpose and a clear vision for the future, Jayden Thompson embarked on his professional journey, ready to make a difference and continue the fight for justice. The path ahead was bright, and Jayden was prepared to navigate it with courage and determination. Do you believe Jayden's decision to return the lost dog was the right choice even with the challenges he faced? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to my channel. I put in a lot of time and effort crafting these heartfelt narratives, and your support truly means the world to me. Thank you for being a part of this journey.